After Wendy underwent a C-section, I was chatting with her in the hospital room when I received a text from my son, Brian. "I've arrived at the hospital, but which room are you all in?" My husband, Caden, and I hurried to the hospital entrance. There, we saw Brian, out of breath. Caden walked briskly in front of me. "Where's Wendy?" Without answering Brian's question, Caden glared at him with a demonic expression. "You won't see your grandchild. We're taking the baby." "Huh? What do you mean?" Brian seemed bewildered, as if he didn't understand anything. This only irritated me more. "This is from Wendy." I glared at Brian and handed him the divorce papers Wendy had given me. "What's this? I don't understand." Brian weakly said that and then left with the divorce papers. Why did it come to this? We silently returned to Wendy's hospital room, feeling disheartened. When we opened the door, Wendy looked worried as our eyes met. "It's okay. We'll protect you and your family. Wendy, just think about yourself and the baby. And of course, come to our house after the birth as planned." I gently rubbed Wendy's back as she cried like a child. "My name is Abby. Caden and I have one son, Brian." "Mom, this is heavy, isn't it? Let me carry it." Since he was little, Brian has always been a kind child, offering to carry bags heavier than himself when we went shopping. Perhaps it's thanks to Caden's upbringing. "Brian, there are people in the world who are smaller, weaker, and different from you. You should be kind to them too." Got it. Caden generally let Brian do as he pleased, but he was always insistent on teaching him this. Thanks to that, Brian grew into a gentle and calm young man. In middle school, Brian brought home a puppy with only 3 legs. "What happened to this little guy?" "He was abandoned. Maybe because he only has 3 legs." Brian looked at the puppy with sad eyes. "I'll take good care of him, so can we keep him?" Though he asked for permission, it was clear from his determined tone that Brian had already made up his mind. "Let's ask Dad too." That evening, Brian greeted Caden holding the dog, explaining what happened during the day and asking if they could keep it. "Brian, are you ready for this responsibility?" "Yes. I can't abandon this little guy just because he has 3 legs." "All right, let's go buy what we need." And so, a new member was added to our family that day. The dog's name is Clover. Named, of course, by Brian. Clover at first struggled with running and going to the toilet but eventually got used to living with 3 legs. "Good morning, Clover. Let's go for a walk." Brian and Clover were always together. Brian didn't want to be apart from Clover so much that he chose a university close enough to commute from home. "Clover's like a brother to me." Fully grown, Brian lay with Clover sleeping on his stomach. They were like real brothers, and it was heartwarming to see. Eventually, Brian had to leave home because of a job. He moved to a place an hour away from his parents' house to live on his own. "Please take good care of Clover." Brian, always responsible, regretted not being able to take care of Clover to the end. "Let's wait for your big brother to come home together, okay?" We sent Brian off with smiles. The company Brian joined was newly established, mainly staffed by people in their 20s and 30s. Though not the type to lead in school, Brian's kindness and sense of responsibility were recognized, and he became a department head at 32. He seemed busy every day, often still at work when we called at 8 p.m. However, it was funny how Brian would instantly reply whenever I sent him a photo of Clover. One day, Brian brought home a woman named Wendy. "This is Wendy, whom I'm dating. She's a psychiatrist." It was the first time Brian had brought a woman home. "Welcome." "But Brian, you should have told us before bringing her over." "It's okay. Our place is always clean because Mom keeps it tidy." "That's not what I meant." Wendy, watching our exchange, smiled softly. She seemed gentle and intelligent, a wonderful woman with a vibe similar to Brian's. "Oh, Clover. How've you been?" 17-year-old Clover slowly made his way to the entrance. After sniffing Brian a bit, Clover went to Wendy and showed his belly. Nice to meet you, Clover. Your brother has shown me lots of your pictures. You're so cute. When Wendy stroked his belly, Clover blissfully closed his eyes. Clover, you switched sides to Wendy in a heartbeat. You're unbelievable. Clover stuck out his tongue. Everyone burst into laughter at this. While the four of us were chatting, Brian said he planned to marry Wendy, which moved me deeply. Seeing me like this, Wendy, looking a bit nervous, said, "Actually, there's something I need to tell you first." Wendy looked at Brian, then started speaking with determination. I was raised in foster care. My real parents died in an accident when I was young. Is that so? I wasn't sure how much to pry, so I gave a non-committal response. Wendy seemed to understand my feelings and shared more about her background. Until I met Wendy, I took having parents for granted. But not everyone has that. If I didn't have my parents, I might have given up on going to college. But Wendy, despite her circumstances, didn't despair and worked hard to achieve her dreams, even now. Brian said this, smiling warmly at Wendy. Thank you for sharing that. We respect you a lot, Wendy. Please take good care of Brian. Wendy finally seemed to relax after hearing our words. Can I be a little selfish? I said to Wendy, who tilted her head. How about we go for lunch together sometime? Everyone laughed at my suggestion. What's this all of a sudden? Wendy must be surprised. Actually, I've always dreamed of going shopping or to a cafe with a daughter. Men always prefer quantity over style and won't take you to fancy places, right? Sorry, we always end up at diners. Wendy laughed out loud, watching our exchange. I've always longed for something like that too. I'm so happy you invited me. Soon after, Wendy and I became close friends. One day, we found out Wendy was pregnant. Caden and I were overjoyed. Brian and Wendy got married, and Wendy moved into Brian's condo to start their life together and prepare for the birth. Seeing Wendy's belly grow bigger with each visit filled us with happiness. Then, one day close to the due date, Brian and Wendy came over. Actually, I've been approached about a 6-month business trip to the New York office starting next week. Caden and I frowned. Why don't you turn it down? Having a child isn't just about the birth. Right. You're the only father this child has. We expressed our concerns about Brian's long business trip. But then Wendy said, I'll be fine. My workplace is understanding, and they've already reduced my workload. Brian said he'll come back on his days off, and I want to support his career. Wendy said this with a steady gaze. Caden and I exchanged looks. Well, the final decision is yours. Silence followed for a moment. If you're okay with it, Wendy. I broke the silence. After the birth, come stay with us. No matter how young you are, you need to rest as much as possible after giving birth, or it'll affect you later. Wendy's eyes widened in surprise. We think of you as our own daughter. This is the least we can do. Oh, but only if you're okay with it, Wendy. Before I could finish speaking, Wendy interrupted. Thank you so much. May I take you up on that offer? I nodded vigorously. Brian also looked relieved, and he and Wendy shared a smile. I thought everything would be fine, even with Brian's long business trip ahead. But after Brian left for the New York office, I worried that Wendy might struggle going shopping alone, so I visited her every weekend. Initially, Wendy greeted me with her usual cheerfulness, but around 2 weeks after Brian left, she seemed to sigh more and appeared distracted. Wendy? She would smile when I called her, but it was clear something was off. Wendy, are you feeling all right? If you're worried about anything, please talk to me. I've been through childbirth myself, obviously, so I might be able to help. Thank you for always being there. I'm okay. I was concerned because she seemed to be losing weight, but Wendy didn't say anything, so I decided to just keep an eye on her. Then, one day, I received a call from Wendy. Abby, I need help. Wendy, are you okay? Has your labor started? I could hear Wendy groaning over the phone. You're just at 35 weeks, right? It's too early for the baby to be born. Normally, babies are born between 37 and 41 weeks, so a birth at 35 weeks would be considered preterm. Abby, I'm scared. Wendy was alone, facing the fear of her first contractions and the prospect of premature birth. I took a deep breath and spoke to Wendy calmly. Wendy, I'm calling an ambulance now. Just wait. Everything will be okay. We're coming too. After saying that, I hung up and immediately requested an ambulance for Wendy's house. I obtained the name of the hospital where she would be taken from the paramedics, and Caden and I rushed to our car. I also sent an email to Brian to keep him updated. By the time we arrived at the hospital, Wendy was undergoing an emergency C-section. Don't worry. Both Wendy and the baby are doing their best. Wendy is at 35 weeks, so it is a premature birth. The baby will need to be managed in the NICU for a while. The nurse explained everything clearly. Hearing that Wendy and the baby were safe, we felt a huge sense of relief. I was allowed a brief glimpse of the baby being taken to the NICU, and the sight of such a tiny being brought tears to my eyes, filled with wonder and love. After the surgery, we waited in the hospital room for Wendy to wake up. Abby. An hour later, Wendy woke up. You did great, Wendy. The baby was premature, so the baby is in the NICU, but it's okay. Brian will be here in about 2 hours. I mentioned Brian's name to cheer her up, but for some reason, Wendy started to cry. Both Caden and I were flustered by her reaction. It's okay. The baby is safe. Thank you for being so strong, Wendy. Wendy shook her head vigorously and began to speak slowly. Brian is having an affair. She said this and then covered her face with her hands. Brian, having an affair? We were speechless at such an unexpected revelation. According to Wendy, Brian had an affair with a woman named Betty while on his business trip and had gotten her pregnant. But that pregnancy, it's only been a month since he went on his business trip, right? A pregnancy isn't possible. Indeed, Caden's calm response made sense to me. However, Wendy shook her head. It turned out Brian had been having the affair before this business trip and was planning to live with Betty in New York during it. Who told you that? I couldn't believe Brian would do such a thing and became defensive. A few weeks ago, Betty came to me as a patient for counseling. Betty had shown a picture of Brian and said, I'm pregnant with this man's child, but I was shocked to find out he's married. Seeking advice for her emotional distress. I can't believe something like that happened. I believe that's why Wendy hasn't been feeling well lately. As Caden and I looked down, unable to say anything, Wendy spoke. I was planning to divorce him once the baby was safely born. She said this and pulled out divorce papers formed from her bag, already filled out on her part. Seeing Wendy like this, we could feel the firmness of her decision. I don't want to see Brian anymore. Can you give this to him on my behalf? Wendy asked us, handing over the divorce application form. Seeing Wendy in such pain, I couldn't forgive Brian, even if he was my son. Caden felt the same way. I'm at the hospital, but which room are you guys in? Caden and I hurried to the hospital entrance. There, out of breath, was Brian. Under normal circumstances, he would have been a loving dad rushing to see his wife and baby. It should have been a moment of joyful reunion. But now, knowing the truth, I couldn't help but despise Brian. Caden walked briskly ahead of me. Where's Wendy? Without answering Brian's question, Caden glared at him with a look of fury. You won't see your grandchild. We're taking the baby. Huh? What do you mean? Brian seemed confused, as if he didn't understand anything. This only irritated me more. This is from Wendy. I too glared at Brian and handed him the divorce papers Wendy had given me. What's this? I don't understand. I could tell Brian was also frustrated. Think about what you've done. You don't have the right to see them. Caden and Brian glared at each other for a while, But what happened to you all? Brian weakly said that and then left with the divorce papers. It was the first time we had ever spoken to each other in such harsh tones. Caden and I could only sigh deeply as we watched Brian's retreating figure. We returned silently to Wendy's hospital room. Upon opening the door, our eyes met Wendy's, who looked worried. "It's okay. We'll take care of you both. Wendy, just focus on yourself and the baby. And of course, come to our house after the birth as planned." Tears started to fall from Wendy's eyes again. "Thank you." I gently rubbed Wendy's back as she cried like a child. 8 days later, Wendy was discharged from the hospital. The baby couldn't be discharged yet, but was growing a little each day without any major issues. Seeing her child living resiliently in the incubator, Wendy seemed to have resolved to live strongly herself, and since that day, I hadn't seen Wendy cry. "Abby, I want to deliver some breast milk to the hospital this afternoon. Could you drive me there?" "Of course, I want to see Joy too." We decided to focus on living a normal life as long as Wendy didn't bring up Brian. By the way, Wendy named her child Joy. Not so much for her own child to be happy, but to make those around her happy. It seemed very Wendy-like to me. Abby. I need to talk." One day, Wendy approached me with something serious on her mind. "What is it?" I immediately sensed it was about Brian. "Actually, I spoke with Brian on the phone last night." Wendy's health had stabilized, and it seemed she had decided to confront Brian, initiating a call to him yesterday. Brian was completely unaware of the situation and seemed very flustered. Wendy then told him about Betty coming to her as a patient. Brian insisted that he knew Betty through work, but they weren't close enough to have long conversations, and he had no knowledge of any affair or pregnancy involving Betty. Hearing Brian's desperate denials made Wendy waver. "Brian wants to meet Joy, so we've arranged to meet him at the hospital. Abby, could you be there too?" Wendy asked apologetically. I reassured her. "Of course. You and Joy have our support, so don't worry. Do what you need to feel at peace." "Thank you." Wendy looked relieved. I resolved to fully support Wendy, who had truly become a mom. That weekend, Wendy and I went to the hospital at 1 p.m. as planned. Although we arrived 10 minutes early, Brian was already there, looking around anxiously. Wendy watched Brian from a distance for a while, looking somewhat sad. "Are you okay?" "Yes. I'm a mom now." Wendy walked straight towards Brian, who had noticed us and was staring back at us. "Long time no see. Are you okay?" "Thank you so much, Wendy, for bringing our child to this world." Wendy's face twisted at Brian's words. Yes, Brian was originally such a kind person. I felt my eyes getting warm. "This way." Saying so, Wendy quickly started walking towards the NICU, probably not wanting her tear-stained face to be seen. As we walked through the entrance, a stretcher passed by us. "Betty? Betty, the affair partner?" I thought I had misheard, but Wendy clearly called out Betty again and spoke to the woman on the stretcher. "What happened to you?" "Oh, Dr. Wendy. I had a little accident, but it's just a minor neck injury," Betty answered while lying down. "What about the baby?" The attending doctor's face turned pale at Wendy's question. "Mrs. Cox, you said you weren't pregnant before we took the X-ray, right?" Betty looked surprised. "No, I am pregnant. I made a mistake. I work as a psychiatrist. Mrs. Cox is my patient. From what I've heard, she's supposed to be 12 weeks pregnant." "What?" The doctor immediately took the stretcher to a nearby exam room. The three of us exchanged looks. After a while, the doctor who had pushed the stretcher came out. "Mrs. Cox is definitely not pregnant." The doctor stated this clearly. So, Brian's affair was a lie too? Looking at Betty lying there, she had a sullen expression on her face. Brian, who had been hiding behind us until now, stepped forward. "Mrs. Cox." It seemed like Betty noticed Brian's presence for the first time. Brian, why are you here? Betty's voice trembled as she looked at Brian. Why would you tell such a lie? We're just acquaintances from work, right? Brian stated this calmly, without raising his voice. Betty bit her lip. Finding out that both the affair and the pregnancy were lies concocted by Betty, I slumped to the ground. Brian, I'm sorry for not believing in you. That was the first thought that came to mind. Just as I was about to convey this to Brian, Betty started to cause a scene. I'm the one who loves Brian the most, Betty cried out, but Brian looked at her coldly. I can't reciprocate your feelings. If you do anything more to bother our family, I won't hesitate to call the police. Even as Betty continued to cry and plead, her words held no value anymore. We left Betty in the care of the doctors and the staff around us and walked away. She's so cute. Brian peered into the incubator upon reaching the NICU. Joy, Daddy's here for you. Joy reacted to Wendy's gentle voice. I quietly stepped out of the room. I'm so glad, truly glad. Watching the family of 3 from outside the room, tears started to overflow. I need to tell Caden right away. I immediately messaged Caden. Upon returning home, Caden greeted me. Brian, I'm sorry for not believing in you. That was the first thing Caden said to Brian. We're really sorry. Wendy and I, standing beside Caden, echoed the sentiment. Seeing us like this, Brian smiled gently. It's okay. I feel hungry for the first time in a while. I hadn't noticed until now, but Brian looked thin, as if he hadn't been eating well. He must have been worrying a lot. Feeling guilty, I tried to hold back my tears. Noticing my state, Brian said, I want to have your meatloaf again, Mom. Meatloaf, got it. I'll go shopping right away. I wiped my tears discreetly and went out to shop. He must have tried to keep me from crying in front of everyone. I was reminded once again of how kind Brian is. After eating my homemade meatloaf, Brian returned to New York that day, but 3 days later, Joy was allowed to be discharged from the hospital. Despite it being a weekday, Brian took the day off to go to the hospital with Wendy to pick up Joy. Caden and I eagerly awaited their return. We're home. Rushing to the entrance, I saw Joy sleeping soundly in Brian's arms. She seemed so at peace in Dad's arms. Wendy and Brian exchanged smiles. I'm so happy. I meant to keep it to myself, but the words slipped out. Seeing me like this, Brian smiled. Of course, look. Brian nodded towards Clover, who was slowly approaching the entrance. Clover, this is Joy. Take good care of her. Clover sniffed Joy's hand and then rolled over to show his belly. These two are gonna make everyone around them happy, the best duo. That's when I realized. Maybe, somewhere in her heart, Wendy had always believed in Brian. Wendy, thank you. I thanked Wendy. Thank you for everything. It seemed Wendy wasn't sure what the thanks were for. However, Wendy, watching Brian, Joy, and Clover with a gentle gaze, looked as beautiful as a goddess. Then, life centered around Joy began. Joy, let's take a nap with Grandpa. Caden, who hadn't even changed Brian's diapers, was now eagerly taking care of Joy. It's a big help having such a reliable grandpa. He just wants to play with Joy. Wendy and I laughed as we watched Caden's antics. As initially planned, Brian returned from New York after 6 months. Brian, why don't you and your family live with us? Caden suddenly suggested this at dinner on the day Brian returned. Huh? Of course, it's fine if you don't want to. I was just thinking we have spare rooms. Caden took a sip of water, seemingly to hide his embarrassment. Seeing Caden like this, Wendy and I burst into laughter. If you and Abby are okay with it, we'd love to live together. I truly think Wendy is a wonderful wife. Caden, oblivious to Wendy's thoughtfulness, said, Of course. Well, it's about time for Joy's bath. Saying so, he started preparing Joy's bath. Gradually, we moved Brian's family's belongings in, and our life together began. Though it was a new arrangement for Brian, the rest of us, including Clover, continued to live as we always had, with joy at the center of our lives. I never knew Dad liked kids so much. Brian was surprised at how much Caden doted on Joy. By the way, what happened to Betty? I had avoided bringing up Betty to spare Wendy any worry, but I was always curious. Well, it's a long story. Brian frowned. According to Brian, even after the truth was revealed, Betty continued to visit his workplace, causing scenes unabashedly. The company warned her multiple times that they would call the police if she didn't stop, and when she ignored the warnings, it indeed turned into a police matter. After being taken away by the police, Betty suddenly disappeared and stopped showing up. The extent of her obsession with Brian gave me the creeps. It's okay. We've moved here, and she can't break our family anymore. Brian's words were casual, but they deeply impressed me. Brian's family is undoubtedly bound by a strong bond. I resolved in my heart to protect this family, along with Caden, no matter what. By the way, where's Clover? Clover wasn't on his usual spot on the sofa. As I looked around, Brian gestured for me to come over quietly. Peeking into the room Brian was looking into, I saw Joy and Caden napping together, with Clover lying between them, looking at us. Seems like no one can get between Joy and Clover. Caden would be sad to hear that. We chuckled quietly at the scene. I can't let you take care of my mom anymore, said my brother Damon with a stern expression, while our mother, Melissa, beside him, nodded repeatedly with a malicious smile. I think it's better for me to live with Damon and his family. So, I want you to move out as soon as possible. Hearing those words, I felt my heart grow cold. Anger bubbled up inside me towards my mother, who had always ordered me around, and towards Damon and his family, who had never helped with anything. Seeing my reaction, Damon looked down on me with dissatisfaction. What's with that look? Someone who can't even take care of their own mother properly has no right to act so high and mighty. My name is Gina. I'm 32 years old and work for a major IT company. I live at home with my parents, Cody and Melissa, both 62. I've always been very close to my conservative father, who taught me fishing as a hobby. We often go fishing together on weekends. On the other hand, my mother has a free-spirited nature. If I ever planned to relax at home over the weekend, she would burst into my room announcing, "We're going on a trip right now, get ready immediately," dragging me along on her whims without considering my opinion. I have an older brother, Damon, 3 years my senior. Like my mother, Damon acts before he thinks, which clashed with my cautious nature. We fought constantly as children, so our relationship has never been very good. Whenever Damon and I would fight, my mother would intervene, always favoring Damon since she's always liked him more, telling me I was in the wrong and was forced to apologize to him. Now that we're adults, those fights have ceased, but I remember feeling like my mother always favored Damon. 5 years ago, Damon decided to marry a woman named Natalia, a colleague from his work, when she became pregnant. This led to him moving out, ending discussions of living together since Natalia was against it. Since then, it's been just my father, my mother, and me. 4 years ago, my father died in a truck accident at work. The sudden loss left me emotionally unstable, crying uncontrollably and taking a long time to recover. The shock was even greater for my mother. She was a housewife, but she stopped doing any housework and shut herself in her room after the accident. Then, tragedy struck again when my mother had fell down the stairs. It caused severe injury, requiring extensive care. This accident further depressed her, to the point where she wouldn't leave her room or eat the meals I prepared, becoming alarmingly thin. Deciding the situation was unbearable, I used my father's inheritance and my savings to build a barrier-free house that would be more accessible for my mother. The construction went smoothly, resulting in a functional, accessible home suitable for taking care of my mother. She seemed to be happy about the house and gradually began to regain her brightness. She couldn't walk freely but started leaving her room to sit and relax on the porch. Since then, I've been juggling a busy schedule of work, household chores, and caring for my mother. One day, coming home from work, I found Damon and Natalia visiting with their child, their laughter filling the entrance. "I'm home." "Oh, I didn't know you guys were visiting." "Welcome home." Damon, looking serious for once, said he needed to talk. I changed out of my suit into more comfortable clothes and joined Damon and Natalia in the living room. "What's all the formality about? What's going on?" When I asked, Damon cheerfully responded, "Gina, we've decided to live with Mom, so you need to leave this house." Despite their initial refusal to live together when they got married, Damon and Natalia suddenly changed their mind and announced they'd be living with our mother, leaving me dumbfounded by their unreasonable request to move out. "This house isn't big enough for all of us, especially with kids around. There's just not enough room. So, Gina, you need to leave. Plus, you're 32, a good age to stop relying on your parents and live on your own." "Exactly, Gina. How can you not see you're being a burden to Melissa? As an adult, you should have realized this without us having to tell you. It's time to stop depending on your parents." I was unilaterally criticized by Damon and Natalia. I wanted to argue that I wasn't just relying on my parents, but, to be honest, I've always wanted to live with Damon and the others. He's our precious eldest son. And Gina, you've always been cautious and slow in everything you do, which was frustrating to watch, and it was also creepy not knowing what you were thinking. My mother suddenly revealed her desire to live with Damon and others and her thoughts about me. "Besides, Gina, you're always busy with work and never take care of the house. It's pointless to live with you, you're useless. Now that Damon and they have decided to live with me, please pack your things and leave." It turned out my mother never saw me as part of the family, but merely as a convenient helper for chores. I often came home late because of work and couldn't properly do the housework, so I was pushed to leave. I could have forgiven Damon and Natalia's harsh words, but my mother's cut deep. After our father passed away, I've been struggling to support my mother, juggling work and home care despite being exhausted. Damon and Natalia lived far from home and couldn't be relied on. My job was also far from home, requiring long commutes. Since remote work is not supported, many employees commute by car for long periods of time. I had thought about moving closer to work after my father's death, but chose to support my grieving mother who needed care. Yet, it seemed she only saw me as a housekeeper. Feeling betrayed by my mother, sadness and anger welled up within me. "So, you're too busy to properly care for Mom, huh? Truly, a disgrace to the family. If you're such a failure, just pack up and leave." "Hey Damon, that's too harsh. Don't worry, Gina, we'll live with Melissa and support her perfectly." "Oh, Natalia, that's reassuring. Unlike Gina, you make me feel secure. A family should be like this." Damon's words unleashed all the anger and sadness I had been holding back. "All right, I'll get everything sorted and be free from this house." Suppressing my swirling emotions, I said just that and returned to my room. Even as I climbed the stairs to my room, I could hear my mother and the others bad-mouthing me in the living room. It seemed I was the only one who thought of us as a family. The rest didn't seem to consider me as such. With that realization, my suppressed feelings of anger, sadness, and frustration overflowed. Once in my room and the door closed, I made a decisive phone call with a heavy heart. 2 weeks after I left the house, Damon called me. "Hey, Mom's not doing any housework. What's going on?" According to Damon, they were struggling because my mother wasn't taking care of the house or the kids, doing nothing at all. I thought this would happen since she wasn't doing any housework even when I was there, but it seems Natalia's plans didn't account for this. It turns out Natalia planned to have an easy life by relying on our mother to do the chores and take care of the grandchildren, despite the fact she needed care herself. I was appalled by Natalia's naive thinking and Damon's complaints, despite his agreement to the plan.
You never should have expected living with Mom to work out so well, especially knowing she needed care from the start. What are you complaining about now? I didn't sign up for this level of immobility,
Damon retorted childishly.
Besides, it's not just that. People claiming to be from a real estate agency and construction company have been bothering us, wanting to see the house. We've been ignoring them, thinking they're scammers, but they've been sending letters for a while and now showing up and calling. It's getting really annoying.
Damon expressed his frustration, to which I coolly responded.
That's because I hired those professionals. I've sold the house, so you need to move out soon. What? Why are you selling Mom's house on your own? It's our home, don't joke around.
Ignoring Damon's outrage, I explained that it was already discussed with our mother.
Why do you think the house built with my money is Mom's, or yours for that matter? I built it, so it's my right to sell it. The buyers are thrilled to build an apartment complex on the land, including the surrounding area. How could you do something like this without considering us, the family living there? Who was it again that said I'm useless to the family and should leave? It's my house, so whatever I decide to do with it is my prerogative.
Damon, unable to counter when faced with his own inconsistencies, suddenly changed his tone and begged. Please, we were wrong. Stop the sale and the demolition. Talk to the contractors, persuade them to stop. Here's the deal, you can stay, we'll even make the rent cheap and do some chores. Isn't that a good offer? We're inviting you back into the family. Even now, Damon failed to grasp the situation. The audacity of expecting rent from me for my own house, assuming I'd do chores, and arrogantly offering to welcome me back into the family was astonishing. I informed him the sale was final and urged them to vacate the house without hindering the contractors, then hung up. Despite Damon's subsequent calls, which I ignored, messages from Natalia and our mother soon followed, blaming me and pleading to stop the sale. I declined each request and firmly blocked their contacts, resolved never to see them again. A coworker living near the house later updated me on my mother and Damon's situation. Following my call, contractors began demolition. They faced resistance and harassment from my mother and Damon, who spread malicious rumors of illegal construction in the neighborhood. Forewarned of potential trouble by me, the contractors were somewhat prepared. However, they threatened to call the police after enduring severe harassment. The mother and Damon, who were frightened by the cold stares from people who were looking forward to the construction of the new apartment complex and by the word police, seemed to back down and stopped harassing them. Facing the cold reality of losing their home and intimidated by the mention of police, my mother and Damon ceased their harassment, allowing demolition to proceed smoothly. They eventually moved to a cramped apartment nearby. However, my mother continued neglecting chores and caregiving, leading to daily loud arguments with Natalia. Natalia was overwhelmed by the burden. Despite seeking Damon's help, his busy work schedule offered no relief. Ultimately, Natalia reached her limit and disappeared one night with her children, leaving my mother and Damon behind. Damon was frantically searching for Natalia and trying to get in touch, but to no avail. All that was left was the filled-out divorce papers. The apartment he moved to in a hurry was chosen for its speed, without properly viewing it or specifying detailed conditions. As a result, it was difficult for our mother, who needed care, to live there, and since Natalia left, she reluctantly started doing household chores, but couldn't do everything because of the injury. Damon also started doing household chores out of necessity, but since he had never really done them before, the quality was terrible, and he's been arguing with our mother every day. After Natalia and the children ran away, Damon, tired from work, returns home to the stress of unfamiliar chores and caring for his mother, making him look older than his actual age and becoming an outcast at work. His personality, originally vibrant like our mother's, had enriched his life with friends and a fulfilling private life, but this lifestyle has deteriorated his mental state, making his harsh behavior stand out. Gradually losing friends and becoming a pariah at work, he seems to be in a lonely position. Moreover, our mother has recently been calling out for me in the house, causing rumors in the neighborhood, as a colleague told me. On the other hand, I am now living abroad. I had been continuously told by my boss that I should go to the overseas branch, but I declined because I was living with my mother who needed care. But since I was kicked out of the house, without any reservations, I accepted the offer to transfer abroad and immediately flew from the States. Life in a new environment is surrounded by daily new stimuli, which is very enjoyable. Working with a different perspective than that of the United States comes with its challenges, but I find it very rewarding. Furthermore, a colleague who had thought of me before I left confessed, and though we are in a long-distance relationship, we have become the best partners, encouraging and elevating each other. We plan to marry when I return back to the States, so I'm eagerly working hard while looking forward to the day I return. Freed from constraints, I am savoring happiness and spending fulfilling days. The stuff the janitor touched is filthy. Throw it all away. I realized it was futile to say anything to her. I had endured everything she did or said until now. But after she threw away something precious given to me by my daughter, Sherry, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I won't let her have her way anymore.
Fine by me. I'll throw everything away.
I decided to fight back. This retaliation would cost Clarice everything. First, I want to talk about how my relationship with Clarice deteriorated to this point. I am Heidi, a housewife who works as a janitor. Living with my daughter, Sherry, who loves drawing and crafting, and my husband, Matthew. I had been a housewife since giving birth, but I started working again when Sherry entered elementary school. My job is mainly cleaning the building where the company is located. It was hard to learn everything as it was my first time, but now, a month later, I've finally gotten used to the job. There are many mothers raising children at my workplace, so I can consult about parenting, and the welfare benefits are solid. I've always liked cleaning and organizing, so I find my job fulfilling. Matthew has always understood how hard I've worked at home and raising our child. When I told Matthew I wanted to work, he was very supportive.
It's great you want to work. Thanks for everything you've done at home. From now on, I'll do even more with the housework and childcare, so go for the job you want.
I'm grateful to Matthew for saying that. When Matthew thanked me, I was a bit moved. And indeed, Matthew has been really stepping up with the housework and childcare. On days when Matthew comes home early, he cooks dinner and spends time with Sherry, giving me time to rest. I'm so grateful to have such a kind husband. My life seems perfect, but I have one problem. It's about Clarice, who lives nearby. My house and Clarice's house are within walking distance. Clarice always comes over to my house when Matthew is at work, without calling first. She completely disregards my schedule. And every time she comes, she demands coffee and snacks, which is troubling. I once asked her to at least call before coming, but
to visit family, I need permission? Why did my son marry such a cold-hearted woman?
I managed to make her quite angry. While it's fine for Clarice to be angry alone, she tends to spread rumors about me when she's upset, so I'd prefer to resolve things peacefully. Clarice doesn't seem to like my housekeeping or parenting, often complaining.
Heidi, Sherry seems skinny. Are you making sure she gets nutritious meals? You're not great at cooking, so you need to try harder. Heidi, you're hanging your laundry all wrong. How can you be so bad at this after being a housewife for years?
Because she didn't like my cooking, she's even thrown away meals I made right in front of me. Not only that, but she has tried to take Sherry out without telling me where they're going multiple times.
What's wrong with taking my granddaughter out? I'm better at parenting than you, so don't worry.
I was really at my wit's end when she said that. Of course, I always tell her to stop because it's worrying, but it never works. Matthew is completely on my side, and sometimes he talks to Clarice for me. Clarice seems to listen and pretend to reflect at the moment, but it never really changes anything. One day, when Clarice came over, she asked about my job.
So, you've been working for about a month? How is it? You should have stayed home and been a housewife. My son is too lenient on you. What job is it again?
Despite her frequent visits, Clarice doesn't know what my job is. She believes that women should stay home, opposing me working and not even trying to understand my job.
I'm working as a janitor. I've finally gotten used to it recently.
When I answered with a smile, Clarice's face contorted.
Wait, janitor? You mean like cleaning and handling trash, even cleaning toilets?
Yes, cleaning inside the building where the company is. Before I could finish, Clarice slammed her hand on the living room table.
This is a joke.
I was stunned by Clarice's sudden fury.
What's wrong? Dirty. You're always touching other people's trash? Cleaning dirty places and toilets that anyone could have entered? And then you cook for the family? That's unsanitary. Quit that job immediately.
Clarice was furious like a raging fire. But I couldn't understand why I was being criticized so harshly. When I tried to respond, Clarice said,
I don't want to talk to you anymore. You really have no common sense. Listen to me. Quit the job immediately.
She left with those parting words. I always wear gloves, a mask, and special clothing for cleaning. I disinfect before and after cleaning, so there's no way I'm bringing dirt into the house. I felt anger beyond sadness at Clarice's prejudice. Even after Matthew explained the cleaning job to Clarice, she still thought it was dirty work. Then, one day after Matthew, Sherry, and I went shopping, I noticed something was wrong as soon as we got back.
The door is unlocked.
And the house was tidier than usual. No, things were missing. We had family photos, Sherry's drawings, and crafts from kindergarten and school displayed in the living room. They were gone.
Where's the drawing of Mommy I did?
It's missing. My craft projects were also missing. Could it be a burglary? As that thought crossed my mind, I received a call from Clarice.
Hello? Sorry, I'll call back later. Something serious has happened.
Did you get back? I threw away everything you touched in the house. I couldn't believe my ears. Later, Clarice proudly admitted she had made a copy of the key without me knowing.
It's troubling you made a copy of the key.
And what do you mean you threw things away?
Like photos, Sherry's drawings, and crafts.
As I spoke with a trembling voice, Clarice laughed over the phone.
Anything touched by a janitor is dirty. Dispose them.
Hearing that from Clarice, I realized it was pointless to say anything more to her. I had endured everything she did or said up to this point. But now that she had thrown away something precious that Sherry gave me, I couldn't stay silent any longer. I won't let her do as she pleases anymore.
As you wish. I'll throw everything away.
For the first time, I hung up the phone on Clarice unilaterally. Next to me, Sherry looked anxious. My drawing. Is it gone? Was it thrown away? The drawing Sherry was talking about was the one she had made for my birthday. I still clearly remember Sherry's beaming smile when she gave me the drawing. I gently hugged Sherry, who must have been hurt. I couldn't let Clarice continue to do whatever she wanted. With that resolve, I decided it was time to fight back. The next day, after leaving Sherry at my parents' house, Matthew and I went to his parents' house. Father-in-law, Kevin, looked puzzled by our sudden visit, likely unaware of the incident from the day before. He probably doesn't know about yesterday's incident. When we all sat down in the living room, facing each other, Clarice was the first to speak. Heidi, have you decided to quit your job? I smiled at Clarice, who said this in a demeaning tone.
We will no longer associate with you. What?
While Clarice was stunned, Kevin stood up in a hurry.
Wait. What's this all of a sudden? Saying you'll no longer associate?
Matthew and I explained to Kevin how Clarice had been harassing us and had thrown away our precious memories. I had no idea. What have you done? Kevin murmured, while Clarice hastily tried to justify herself.
Don't get it wrong. Heidi is the one who's bad at explaining. Heidi, you're bad at household chores and lack common sense. I was just trying to teach you because I thought Matthew would be embarrassed.
I was astonished at how she could tell such lies. As I was about to speak, Matthew stopped me and began to speak to Clarice with a grim expression.
Mom, it's because you said to throw away everything she touched that this has happened.
Clarice glared at me sharply.
You really are a horrible woman. The one who's horrible is you, Clarice. Apologize for everything you've done right now. I might have endured it if it were just me, but throwing away Sherry's artwork. I can't forgive you for hurting my daughter.
Clarice, apparently infuriated by being talked back to, clenched her fists and trembled.
Sherry must hate having a mother who does such dirty work. I'm not wrong. I won't apologize.
It was Kevin, not me or Matthew, who became enraged by those words.
Enough. Interfering with Matthew's family and then harassing them is the worst. And you can't even apologize?
Even after Kevin's words, Clarice insisted she was not in the wrong and continued to blame me. Seeing Clarice's attitude, we realized that reconciliation was impossible.
Clarice will never see Sherry again.
Matthew also firmly stated to Clarice.
I've had issues with Mom's behavior before. I've tried to communicate it in a respectful way, but it seems none of it got through to her. But after she hurt Heidi and Sherry, I realized I can't accept Mom anymore. I won't see Mom again either. Take care.
Matthew and I left his parents' house. Clarice continued to yell until the end, saying things like Heidi needs to change her heart, and she's a bad woman who took away my son and granddaughter. She wanted to make me out to be the villain without reflecting on herself. Soon after, we took our next step. Actually, after getting married, we had been using Matthew's last name, but we had planned to change back to my maiden name. Matthew's last name is relatively unique, making it easy to associate us with Clarice, which we disliked, so with the agreement of Matthew and my parents, we decided to change our last name. And we successfully changed our last name. The suggestion to change our last name came from Matthew, but I must admit, I also had my reservations. Knowing that our last name, shared with Kevin, was changing, I knew Kevin would be upset. But when I was struggling with the decision, Matthew told me with a firm look.
I regret not being able to speak up against my mom because she's my mother. I think she'll follow us no matter what, but I've decided to protect our family. That's why we need to change our last name. I plan to keep seeing my dad, and he's agreed to it.
Kevin seemed to regret not being able to admonish Clarice over this incident. But if Kevin and Matthew agreed on it, then I shouldn't worry. We wanted to start anew with a smile as a family. But then, Clarice showed up. According to Kevin, after we left, he and Clarice had a heated argument. Despite the discussion, Clarice refused to apologize. Frustrated, Kevin divorced and kicked Clarice out of the house. Since the house was in Kevin's name, she had no choice but to leave. Without anywhere to go, Clarice came to our house, which was in the middle of moving. Seeing the boxes, Clarice gasped in surprise.
What's this? Why are there so many boxes? We're planning to build our own home, but until then, we thought to stay in another apartment. Since we don't want you dropping by unannounced.
I didn't let Clarice into the house. We're strangers now, so please don't contact us again. Clarice was now completely an outsider. There was no need to be considerate anymore.
Moving? You're always doing what you want. I wasn't informed about any of this. And because of you, I was kicked out of my home. Oh, I know. I'll live with you. Make me a room.
Matthew and I sighed at Clarice's audacity, refusing to apologize yet demanding to live with us.
Sherry, you want to live with your grandma, right?
Clarice tried to involve Sherry in a sweet voice. Dragging children into discussions is the act of a coward. As I was about to intervene, Sherry looked up at Clarice.
I hate you, Grandma. You throw away my treasures and can't even apologize. So I hate you.
Sherry's strong words surprised us. She was not usually one to speak up so boldly, but Clarice's actions were unforgivable. Sherry doesn't want to see you, so please be gone now. The cohabitation proposal from Clarice was rejected by me, Matthew, and Sherry. We left Clarice, who was stunned by the rejection, and headed to our new place. A year has passed since we cut ties with Clarice. We still keep in contact with Kevin. Clarice, known for her harassment and for causing our estrangement, is treated coldly by relatives. It seems she had been harassing Matthew's brother's wife too, who was afraid to break the relationship, and had remained silent until our situation encouraged her to speak up. Clarice is now unable to see not only Matthew but also his brother's family. She hasn't come to apologize to us, and her life must be lonely and isolated. As a form of retribution, it might be enough. Alone, I hope she reflects deeply on her past actions. Our new home is in a place completely unknown to Clarice. Keeping it secret from relatives ensures she won't find out. In our living room, we've decorated with photos, my craft projects, and a family portrait Sherry drew. None of these are trash, but treasures and memories of our home. We plan to cherish this family and its treasures moving forward.